Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Celeste Arrington. I'm Korea Foundation Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs and a member of the core faculty of the GW Institute for Korean Studies, which is co-sponsoring this talk today with the East Asia National Resources Center here at GW. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Yong-Chool Ha from the University of Washington. He is the director of the Center for Korean Studies there, as well as Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Social Science at the Henry Jackson School of International Affairs. As you can tell from his bio, his research interests range widely. And one product of this is this hot off the presses new book that he's going to speak about today, entitled Late Industrialization, Tradition, and Social Change in South Korea, which is a really wide-ranging book that, as you'll hear in the presentation today, examines the social consequences of some of the ways of organizing the industrialization of South Korea. And it also examines not just state-society relations, but business and society relations across really decades. So this is a sweeping book that we're going to hear about today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Ha.
I didn't bring my book, so I had to borrow from her. I want to start off talking about this book cover. This is the real photo taken in 1978. The southern part of Seoul, which was about to be developed. So you see the contrast, the big, apartment complex up there, and down there, plowing farmer still. So it's kind of a contrast. So actually, my son found this out. So everybody seems to like this kind of cover. I hope you like it too. Right? Anyhow, I'd like to start by thanking the Center for Korean Studies here, including Professor Les Carrington and then Yeon-Ho Kim, and then Director of Korean Center now. I heard she's traveling now. So also thank you for your coming. Also those who are joining through Zoom or whatever, internet. This book, the original title that I suggested to the press was much longer than this one. So, Late Industrialization, Tradition, the State and Tradition. So here the state was actually omitted, but also the social consequences in South Korea. Starting 1961 to 1979. That's the original title, but then the press said, nobody will buy your book with that kind of long title. So I had to cut it down like this. And let me first, the way I organize my talk is first I provide the backgrounds of this book, from when and why I came to write this book, a few minutes. And then later I present the where I can locate this book in the context of current status of literature in economy or sociology, things like that. And then I go on to more provide you with the details of gist of the book. Then based upon my findings, so what in what areas can I contribute in terms of providing new interpretations of major issues related to Korea and beyond? Let me just start the first then. All right. The background of this book first is the 1980s intellectual environment in South Korea. I think I don't know how many of you are familiar with the 1980s of South Korea, but then I just started my assistant professorship at Seoul National University right after I got a PhD from Berkeley. What I found out in South Korea at the time was sort of muddy fields of what an intellectual sort of the communities with so many imported theories and frameworks. So that so much so that actually nobody cared too much. What truly what is so distinctive about Korea? So because in a sense, because of too much importation of internet, outside the theories to Korea, actually, what is so distinctly Korea remained residual category. To me, it is a very critical part was missing in other words. That's the basic intention of the book. From there, what I felt was, and at the time, what I felt was this. Even, regardless of the origins of the theories and frameworks, particularly in relation to social sciences, those theories and frameworks work up to 70 or 80%, because any theory deals with the human society, it is supposed to work up to 70 or 80%. But what is so critical is the remaining 30 to 30%. So that's the basic intention of the book. But more substantively, the book anyhow, you see that somehow it betrays me. So the second, more substantively, the gap between political economy and sociology in late industrialization. It's e-books. This one pointed. Somehow, but it doesn't show up here. So, yeah. As you know, probably well, the studies of next or late industrializations like Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, whatever, too much political economy. Then practically none on social change. So this book is about to fill the gap between political economy and sociology. In other words, more concretely speaking, Western social science about late industrialization, on the one hand, much political economy in terms of role of state, but then in terms of social consequences, actually universal theory like a class stratum kind of the issue. So this is strongly entrenched universal consequences of industrialization. That assumption has been applied to the Taiwan or the Korea, something, particularly to Korea. To me, I felt a bit strange. I will explain to you more about this here. This is the more graphic presentation of the intention of the book. So let's say Peter Evans somehow, maybe they don't, red doesn't come out, maybe it's blue, but anyway, this is the typical Evans model embeddedness. I mean, I use this model in my teaching. What is embeddedness? Embeddedness is picturesque in terms of more graphically this one. So society, big society, state inside. So this is embedded through various ties, square ties. That's the basic embeddedness, right? But then what the Scott Paul and the Evans actually did was they tried to they took the state primarily in functional terms to explain how the state plays a role in economic development. My question is this: because of that, their approach to the state is static. I mean, they don't look at the state in dynamic terms. My question is this: through this interaction, what happens to the state itself? What happens to the state as a whole? That's the question that I'm trying to understand. From that perspective, I think this political economy approach to, in other words, bringing the state back in, stop short of reaching societal level. It remain at the level of the political economy. Right? So basically, yeah. So that's what it is. I mean, next. I already explained to you. Let's go. In other words, the limitation of bringing the state back in only to the level of the political economy. Less attention to the role of state in social change. In other words, the role of state actually remained at the level of political economy. I have been very curious. What kind of society has South Korea has become when the state plays such a strong role? So that's the I found a very serious lacuna in the theories and approaches to these late industrializing cases.
Can you just speak into the microphone?
Oh, sorry. It's my style, so what can I do about it? Yeah. So the it's just a freeze. Okay. Okay, let's go. Then modernization theory in terms of particularly tradition. As you know, the original 1960 model or 50 model of modernization theory has long been rejected in terms of role of tradition. So now we have come to the point where they acknowledge the role of tradition, but then not through any specific case study. Let's say the Engelhardt approach to modernization, all based upon surveys. So I have some problem with that kind of approach. Or another late Eisenstadt, for example, all this the broad stroke kind of generalization or the based upon surveys they acknowledge they found out this tradition played some positive role, but then not a specific single case study has been done. How actually tradition interact with the state and the economy? That's the question that I have in this book. And so tradition, the way tradition has been approached so far to me, maybe anthropological study like a micro level study, right? Or invention of traditional literature, which is now very popular, familiar to us. But as you know, as Hobsbawm said, that invention of tradition, this framework is very primitive, actually. It's very random in terms of the selection of cases to prove their point. But here, also, another thing is the sociology of economics. There's a field of sociology of economics within sociology. There, they take advantage or they acknowledge tradition in as a part of explaining economic success, economic the consequences. So my intention, I mean, my problem is this. So in conclusion so far, no adequate theory of social change beyond the theories that claim universal social consequences of industrialization. So I think sociology of late industrialization remains in a kind of a theoretical limbo. That's the my assertion. So then, the next question is this: rather than take a class or whatever that's for granted, I think we need to be more contextualize the pattern of industrialization in terms of social consequences. So the next, how to think about different patterns of human groupings. So I don't want to have any presumptive kind of expectation of either class or not. Just we have to open-minded in anticipating the emergence of certain type of human grouping patterns depending upon the types of patterns of industrialization. So how to think about different patterns of human groupings under the different context of late industrialization. That's the question I'm raising. So then, what about my study in relation to Korean studies? Basically, I wanted to say something more based upon Korea. In other words, I want to say something beyond Korea based upon Korean studies. This is what I call deprovincializing Korean studies. In other words, Korean studies is not about introducing Korea anymore. Korea is a target to understand other countries. That's what I call deprovincializing Korean studies. I already covered this. Now, then, where to start to think about late industrialization and social change? First, of course, we need to start with the late industrialization, meaning state-led. Now, the state is strongly, deeply, closely involved in industrialization, which we all know about. Okay, but then the next one, elite and late industrialization. If you look at the Soviet Union, Japan, Germany, South Korea, wherever you look at, the cases of late industrialization, something is common. That is, some group elite start thinking about acknowledging their backwardness. In other words, some groups should start with the sense of backwardness. So Park Chung-hee, Stalin, Deng Xiaoping, the samurai groups, Meiji. So then without sense of perception, no beginning of late industrialization. Then out of backwardness, they now lead to sense of inferiority. They begin to feel inferior to some country, some area. Okay, that's out of sense of inferiority. Now comes the sense of urgency. In order to overcome a sense of inferiority, you have to hurry up. So South Korean disease, 빨리빨리, for example, comes from this background. So sense of urgency. But then next is ambitiousness in planning. In order to, based upon urgency, then they usually the sort of plan in a very ambitious way, unrealistically. So backbreaking speed, what the Stalin used to say. And then now then state, of course, in order to proceed with the late industrialization tasks, the state allocates a lot of incentives. In the case of South Korea, about 38 different kinds of incentives actually provided by the state. Am I too fast? Okay, fine. And then ultimately, then dependency relationship actually emerged between the state and the business. So let me give you some example of how Park felt about sense of backwardness first. Look at this, one, our retreat on sophistication and stagnation. I mean, it's certainly a sign of backwardness. And then further, we spend most of our time on fratricidal infighting. It was a history of microcosm of the feudal society, which is characterized by idleness, emissiveness, and stagnation. Another sign of backwardness, right? And then sense of urgency, the example. We cannot continue to live like this. And if we do so, we are bound to starve to death or to face the collapse of the economy. Now, even closer, even seconds and then minutes are precious, not to be wasted. Sense of urgency is clearly there. I mean, there are numerous examples like this in Park Chung-hee's writings. Now, then in more or less ambitiousness in planning. So look at this. Somehow I need, oh yeah, only, oh. It's funny, but anyhow, see, I have to move around because of this. So look at this, this is the original growth target, but then you end up 8%, 3% annual growth during first 5-year plan. Second one, even much further. Original 70, now 11.4%. Okay. And third, much, we see, original, this one, and then actually 11.2%. So if you look at around the world, like Soviet Union, Japan, even Taiwan, it's interesting to observe that the initial success of these cases actually always end up with around 10% growth. See, that much high growth. Now, structural change, for example, how rapid Koreans change. Look at this. In England, it took more than 250 years before the proportion of agriculture, 40% came down to 4% the 1935. But in contrast, in South Korea case, look at it. Within a short period of 30 years, actually same thing happened in South Korea. So you see the how rapidly Korean economy changed. Now, ambitiousness. Look at this once again. This original plan target for exports continuously upgrade. Look at this. Continue upgraded. I mean, if you look at these figures, you easily see. This is a sign of ambitiousness. Anyhow, my whole point is that I'm just trying to provide with some specific figures and numbers to you to prove, demonstrate how Park Jung-hee hurried. Right. Then, what are the institutional imperatives of late industrialization? To me, now I'm getting into more core part of the presentation. General proposition is this: the sources of the institutional ironies of late industrialization come from the fact that the more late, the more sense of urgency, the more likelihood to rely on tradition. That's where tradition comes in. Okay? In other words, normally modernist theory, that's where about this, they are wrong. Why? Tradition is about familiarity. Whether in Japan, whether in Soviet Union, whether in South Korea, without familiar institution, people don't cooperate easily. Okay? So whether within the context of a factory, whether with the bureaucrats, it is very important source of familiarity coming from tradition. Yeah. Okay? Anyhow, the reason why tradition is bound to be brought into late industrialization is exactly tradition actually facilitates the economic growth, the economic growth. Okay, that's why tradition is introduced. Then, what is tradition? I mean, once again, tradition is such a fuzzy concept to everybody, to us. But for me, to simplify, I want to first make a distinction between tradition and traditionalism. So here, as a tradition is a living faith of the dead. The Pelican actually defined this: the living faith of the dead, meaning something alive, constantly to be upgraded, and then invented. While traditionalism is a dead faith of living, continuous the efforts to go back to the past pattern. So we need to be very clear about this distinction. I'm not talking about traditionalism here. I'm talking about tradition. Then each case of late industrialization is different in terms of mobilizing tradition. The scope and then the speed, the scope of inventing. For example, Japan stands out in terms of the exhaustiveness in reinventing their own tradition. While South Korea, I would say, Soviet Union and China even, I think, my idea is that Korea, particularly, is a case of harnessing. Harnessing means opportunistic, kind of uneven, occasional, sort of the defaulting to adaptation of tradition without any thorough examination. To me, later on, I hope I have time to elaborate on this. This is the fundamental source of difference between Japan and Korea. In other words, many people, of course, acknowledge difference between Japan and Korea, but I think the fundamental source of the difference comes from the fact that in Japan, thorough invention of their own tradition, including politics, society, culture, what have you. Or at the macro, micro level, Korea, Park Jung-hee actually opportunistically took advantage of current tradition, remaining very the confused the society facing now. Okay, then for Park Jung-hee, for example, he needed some institutions, bureaucracy. And the key question here in terms of social consequences, how they recruit the people for them to work. And in every case, they need both competent and loyal people, which is a universal issue, right? In the case of Park, actually, as you'll go over later, but anyhow, he adopted a very distinctive Korean way of recruiting his own bureaucrats, combining merits and regionalism. But then, as you already said, late industrialization stayed in control of resource allocations with a plethora of incentives. As I said, close to 40 different kinds of incentives in South Korea. But then, modes of implementation mean interaction with business. The patterns of recruitment affect patterns of social groupings. Once again, very simple. So how Park Chung-hee recruited his own people, bureaucrats, and then how business people recruit their own people, and how state and business interact. That process actually is a main source of neofamilism in the case of South Korea. So here, emulation. Oh yeah, it works here. Emulation of the state by business that's a sociology examples. Let me go back here. Example. Here, this is a very simplistic presentation of sociology examples. So, owner is a very family orientation, family ties. Management, higher up management people, they either have regional ties with the owners or the school ties with the owners. The vast majority of workers actually they neither share regional nor school ties with the upper level people. Basically, they gather based upon regional ties. So these are very simplistic presentation. Now, my point here is Korean Chaebol is not only economic institution. It is a microcosm of Korean society. That's my arguments. Okay. So once again, Park actually very shrewd in that he wanted the competent people based upon competitive examination, meaning high civil service examination, those who passed that examination. At the same time, people from his own region were strongly favored. I will momentarily show you the statistics here. Let me go here. Look at this. It's a regional distribution of a Korea bureaucrat, meaning those bureaucrats above the section chief level, meaning in Korean 사무관 level, section chief level. Actually, once I passed high civil examination early on, right after my I graduated college, and I worked for 5 years at Korean Ministry of Industry and Trade, and then I quit the bureaucracy because I hate it. And then so I know the internal stories a little bit, and I was privileged to have a privy access to the retired bureaucrats, the personnel dossiers of 1,000 people, based on which I wrote a book on Korean Ministry of Industry and Trade earlier. Look at this southeastern section. I mean the portion. Look at this. The overall 35%, while southwestern people less than half of it. 14.1%. See, there's already favored strongly toward the southeastern people. Okay? And then within it, so national graduates. Look at this. The 41.5% of the high level bureaucrats came from Seoul National University. But here the catch is this. I mean, among SNU graduates, actually, those who, as you already look at the lower SNU plus Southeastern, then 34%. So lion's share of the SNU graduates. Then behind this SNU facade lie the very sort of competitive, good high school ties within Southeastern region. So when I say SNU, meaning already assumed the high school ties. So I tried because I looked at the high school ties in various countries. Japan. I thought the Korean tradition of high school ties came from colonial Korea via Japan. Actually, it was not. In Japan, high school ties. I mean, college ties is more important than even college, high school ties. Taiwan, neither, not America. I mean, I heard that Turkey may be similar. I heard some. Then very interesting, but then no historical study they had been done until I did in terms of the origins of high school ties. So the reason I'm saying this because not only I suffered from a lack of study, but in fact I ended up spending 11 years in studying colonial issues, and then, so I lost a lot of my hair there. So so high school ties came from colonial period. Wow. High school, the students actually most educated group occurrences at the time. They were the backbone of the anti-Japanese independent movements. So these seniors, juniors, all gathered in the secret rooms. I reviewed the police the reports and then quote the documents to prove this, and then indicating that whether it's a good high school, vocational high school, same thing in Korea. High school ties on pervasive throughout the branches. So it deserves some social study which had never been done until sadly I had to do it. This is a very sad story. Anyhow, so once again, behind this fascinating story like high school based. Any other questions so far? Any comments? Maybe I'm lonely. I'm just kidding. All right, then I'll go over this. All right. Then how about the business sector? Business sector actually emulated mimetic sort of the behavior of recruitment that happened within the business sector. So 49.40, almost 43% actually the upper level of no, I'm sorry. Later, the upper level is Korean bureaucrats, but then let me go to here. 49% actually so rational, while Yonsei Korean University 6 or 7% respectively. So what this indicates to us is exactly the highly regional bias already built in this kind of equipment. But then table management, now business sector. Given this kind of number here, 137, actually 88% of people are actually family owned and ownership, as we already said, right? But then let's go next one. Then look at this. At the managerial level, 35% of them sold national colleges. While Yonsei Korean University respectively 88%. But then later this one. 2,243 high-ranking managers who were not blood related to founders or owners actually shared regional ties with ownership. And the 60% of the enterprise of Southwestern origin, actually they share the 6% between owners and then high-ranking managers. 57% in the case of Southeastern companies. In other words, within table structure also, there's strongly neofamiliarly based. I mean, in the structure. But then, as he said, so national graduates and regionally based. So why? Then it made them easier to get an access to the state, which monopolized all the incentives. So this is the mimetic emulative behaviors of business, and then their interaction with the state through state incentives. To me, that's the hardcore of the neofamilial familism, the formation of new families. So then let me just briefly sum up so far. So social change. I think my proposition is this, which I think is very important. By observing and understanding the process of interactions of late industrialization, tradition, and the state. Without understanding this process, we should not assume any predetermined social units out of it. And so that's the big proposition here. Of course, there are, as you know, in theories and class, there are so many. I mean, everybody knows it. But then they provided variations of class theory. They never gave up on class. Okay? So my contention is that we also should think about contending social unity with class. Any objective of the income-based class, it is supposed to emerge anyhow. But then my question here, whether this kind of neo-families, how neo-families interact with the class category, whether class mitigates, I mean, neo-familism mitigates class, or the independent of each other, or even substituting class. I mean, this is the critical issue in understanding any late industrialization. So, for example, in the case of Japan, the famous Murakami said that Japanese society is not class society; it's a middle mass society. He clearly nullifying this class theory by this middle mass theory. Okay? So let's go over them. Park's sense of backwardness, inferiority, and sense of urgency, ambitious goal setting, and implementation is well known. Park's need for both competent, reliable people from economic development, for economic development. That's a recruitment pattern. Combination of merit and regionalism, as I said. Then that was emulated by Jebels, right? We already saw. So the rest of society, in the rest of society, actually emerged isomorphic kind of institutions or groupings. Jebels used broad regional school ties to secure access to state incentives. That's the source of neofamilism. So I would say unintended consequence of a Korean late industrialization is exactly neofamilism. Okay, then how has it trickled down to the rest of society? Okay? As I said here earlier, this group, this group, this is kind of a backbone of the trickling down of neofamilies to the rest of society. They are huge in numbers, several million people. I mean, the high-ranking managers. They are the middle, so-called upper middle class or middle class. And they are the kind of main carrier of neofamilism. So I used to think that the Korean high-ranking managers at Jebels, to me, pseudo bureaucrats, frankly. I mean, they are the beneficiaries of a state budget. So these people, that's why so-called middle class. To me, as I'll explain to you later, we should not assume same kind of middle class from England or America here, because of this strong state influence over them. So there are middle classes, there are middle classes. So trickle down is one mechanism. The other mechanism is small, medium industry to Jebel relationship. So I interviewed many small, medium industry owners. What do you think? Do you think they are critical of the neofamilianism, which they don't have? No, actually, they would like have it. They have strong wish to have neofamilial ties, but they don't have. So through this kind of dependency of small, medium industry on the Japanese, actually neofamilial ethos actually trickle down to the rest of Korean society. In other words, Jebels not simply an economic entity. It has a larger sociological implications. All right, then, with this kind of framework, then what can I provide some different interpretations about sort of major issues related to Korea or beyond? Okay. So then, for example, colonialism. Now everyone knows the debates on the impact of colonial role on South Korean development is binary. One exploited, the other one development. So I don't care about that. Anyway, on my part, whether you are under colonial or non-colonial, you have to survive. You have to eat. Otherwise, you are stuck to that. Right? So in the economic space, which I indicate in my chapter, in the economic space, it could be there could be some positive, some could be negative. Although I would say more negative, but still I cannot help the recognizing some positive. Right? But anyhow, I don't want to go there. I think what is more important is what happened to Korean society in terms of tradition during colonial period. To me, that's more relevant to understand even what's going on now in Korea. Rather than debating, because of this intervening variable of Park's economic development, now the debate becomes muddled actually. So I would say the Korean society became very much even now confused because of a lack of opportunity to upgrade Korean tradition by Yangban class, which had been or was destroyed because of colonialism. Okay? So I think I can propose new framework to understand the colonial debates with this kind of background. Okay, and the state relations. I mean, we are so much familiar with the only one model of state relations, meaning state versus society model, society confronting state model. That's the prevalent the model in American social sciences. I presented 4 different typologies. One is state versus, of course, society model. And second one is state in society model, meaning African context, state captured by society, so immobilized. Third one is a state over society, meaning Soviet model. So my graphic image of a Soviet model is the snake, actually sort of swallowed much bigger than itself. So bloated kind of the belly image of a snake. That's a Soviet model. So now in Russia, actually, the state had to come out of the society. The state had to come out of the snake's mouth. Society, mouth. So there should be some differentiation. And the fourth model is the exact Japan-Korea model, that is state and society model. So here you cannot, as I explained, in this state and society model, you should not apply state versus society model to state and society model. Okay. In other words, state and society is never confrontation as a state versus society model assumes. So exactly it leads to the next issue, civil society information. So civil society is not universal. It can't be universal because it's contextual. Civil society is after all the birth of the Scotland in the mid 18th century. Civil society is about how to relate to each other based upon anonymity. I mean, very simple to me. But to me, Korean society, everyone knows everyone. Anonymity is very rare. So I would say we should not blindly apply the totally contextually different historical model to another place, like through the name of a civil society. That's my contention. And then this one, what's more important? We are so much familiar with Max Weber's dictum that industrialization brings about bureaucratization. It's not universal. My argument in my chapter is that because of a constant penetration from the business to the state sector, inside the state, actually, it lost bureaucratic integrity. What I call hollowed out. Current bureaucracy has been hollowed out because of a constant penetration. So, once again, we should not assume anything universal. That's my proposition. And then democratic consolidation. I don't like literature on democratic consolidation in American social science, frankly. Why? They lost the touch with the sociology. They only look at the elite level of manipulative aspect of democratic transition. So that's why I think there's a limitation even in Korea case. So what happened to Korean society under power? Without knowing it, how can you understand democratic consolidation? That's my simple question, right? So in other words, American political science has long time lost its sociological connection. In fact, in American academia, what I see is the lack of the understanding of macro issues. And sociology now has been too much kind of micronized, issue-based kind of sociology, not about the macro sociology. Ultimately, I argue the American academia social science community, they could understand why Trump phenomenon emerged in the first place. And this is a good example of the loss of macro sociology now. And then once again, here. Does industrialization bring some individualism? No. I would say South Korea case is a privatism. Why? Individualism is based upon 2 notions. One is you have to understand yourself, also recognize other people. Also, you have to treat other people on an equal distance. And similarly with different people. In Korea, no. Unless you belong to your own neofamilial group, outside of it, you're nothing. This exclusivity is the name of this private beach. Right? So I think we should not blindly use the term individualism to characterize Korean society. That's the my argument here. And then, so overall, I want to go to this international relations. How has successful late industrialization affected South Korea's perspectives on international relations? Normally, any successful case of late industrialization demands recognition from outside. But in the case of Korea, unlike Japan, here the question is this: different international environments of China, Korea, Japan in late industrialization. That's very crucial. That question has never been satisfactorily dealt with in American social science. And so this is important thing. So let me forgive me elaborate on it more. Why? Japan's industrialization occurred in the background of imperialism. Right? South Korea, in the case of in the backdrop of Cold War, and then China actually with the background of globalization. So what difference does it make? Many American liberals have been critical of China. Oh, after 30 years of engagement, nothing happened. To my mind, that's not the case. Among the three countries, China has been the quickest in adopting or understanding the importing the international practices compared to even South Korea and Japan. Okay, so if you look at the South Korea case, even financial crisis 1997-8, the key observation of the time was why Korea remained so close while they're exporting so much, gaining foreign currencies. Right? China was not like that. Only is becoming like that now, but at the beginning it was not like that. China actually very open the economy for several decades, right? So in Japan, the same thing. Japan actually, they are coming from imperial paradigm of international relations, so they occupied even Korea. But Korea, they didn't have any. They didn't have any place to go to other than unification issue. Why? The imperial paradigm has long been lost. So how can South Korea demonstrate its new capability other than unification issue? If you look at what Chun Doo-hwan did, Chun Doo-hwan actually South Korean government became much bolder in proposing unification with North Korea. Prior to that, Park was very passive, based upon functionalism, so-called the wait and see kind of approach. Okay? Then once again, determining operating social units. In other words, once again, I cannot help emphasizing this issue more. That is, we should not assume anything predetermined the social unit that might emerge from industrialization or late industrialization. So finally, Korea versus Japan. One of the missions that I brought to Korea when I left the Seoul National University 16 years ago is exactly how to differentiate Korea from Japan. Why? The dominant view in the West used to be Korea as a second image of Japan. Now I hope I present a different picture of Korea here. Particularly in Japan, as I said, because of a thorough inventing of its own tradition, politics, society, economy, culture, whatever. So so much so that for example, labor relations. It took about 30 years in the Japanese history to come up with their own lifetime labor relations. Korea, nothing like that ever even attempted in the case of South Korea. So if you go to South Korea, for example, each chaebol has a different labor relations. Hyundai automobile is practically the same as American legal kind of dispute model. While the LG Electronics is very much analogous to Toyota. Why? Because they went to Toyota to learn about Toyota labor practices for 60. So that's and then the Samsung even they didn't allow for a long time labor union. Yeah. So why this kind of divergent labor relations in South Korea? Exactly, South Korea there was no attempt to reinvent its own tradition to come up with a sort of a unified labor model. But then the interesting thing about Japan and Korea now is that remember Aoki's famous the Japanese model based upon congruence. So labor, banking, and financing, and then governance structure, they're all congruent relationship, right? That's famous one. Korea was criticized of being lack of congruence. I dare to say by now that because of a lack of congruence, South Korean system or non-systems has been much better in coping with the digital economy compared to that of Japan. Okay? So I don't think there's any further page. Oh, okay, here. Oh, now briefly. Then how do I understand Korean society now? Okay. I think Korean society now has long been living under the midst of ethnic homogeneity. Under that ethnic homogeneity lies so much fragmentation. That's what I see there. Okay? Largely because of harnessing approach to the Korean tradition and because of the confused tradition, very much confused in South Korea. So eventually, they lost sense of community. I used to compare to Korean society the Tadoe, meaning I live in Seattle, so I know the Puget Sound, many islands, right? In the southern part of South Sea of South Korea, too many small islands. Folks call Tadoe, meaning Tadoe means many islands, like the Finland fjord kind of many small islands. So if you look at these small islands from how about from the airplane, they all look like connected. As you're coming down, you begin to see small islands separating from each other. That image, I have a steady image. But then dynamic image of Korea I used to draw upon was bubbling pot, the boiling pot, bubbles in boiling pot image. You know, if you boil water, then bubbles keep pop up, right? Bubbles come up and they easily pop, right? So that's the image that I got of Korean society. Okay? So all told, is this Korean society has lost its sense of the community to me. That's the problem. Low birth rate in Korea is now famous topic, but everybody think about education, housing, all money issue. It's not money issue. Korean women did not have any place to fall back on, ultimately. That's the issue. When my parents gave birth to us, I have 5 brothers, for example, very poor at the time, but but I remember in a small community, they help each other. Sometimes my friend's mother come to feed my brother, for example, right? Something like that happened. So they had this, although they were not aware, conscious, they had the ultimate place to fall back on, community. But now Korean male and females, they don't know where to go to. Okay? So unless they deal with this kind of a renewed sense of community, the Korean birth rate issue will not, maybe some change, here and there some change, but will not ultimately change. Okay? So with that remarks, I will stop here because I don't want to spend too much time. Okay, I spent already too much time.
So I think I'll offer some discussant comments from here, and Professor Ha, if you want to join me up here at the table, that would be great. Yeah, is that all right? So before I start my remarks, I do have to acknowledge our neofamilist ties here in the room today. So we have our own version of it.
Disclaimer.
Yeah, disclaimers. I was born in Seattle, and
oh, okay.
We also, Professor Ha was the professor of our associate director of GWIKS, Yono Kim here in the front row, and others in the room.
My age is much.
And you're my sonbe from Berkeley as well. So there are many different ties that resonate with the themes of this book. So as discussant remarks, I'd like to offer sort of 3 words of praise about the book, and then 3 questions that my read of it raised. So as Professor Ha's presentation alluded to, the fact that South Korea has risen to be one of the top 10 economies in the world very rapidly is well known. The state's role in fostering that economic development is also well known. So is the fact that the state nurtured these large conglomerates, or chaebol, that came to dominate the economy. But this book really adds and contributes a new, fresh light on how the state mobilized ties based on kinship, school, and region, which he calls neofamilism, and used these familial forms, adapted them in its recruitment practices and governance style. This concept of neofamilism, which is my first point here, is really well conceptualized in the book. And this is not just a blanket application of tradition matters or regionalism is important in Korean politics, but I think you really unpack in a very nuanced and detailed way how these school, region, and blood ties were mutually reinforcing, worked to help the state mobilize business sector, but then were imitated in the business sector and reproduced in the private sector, as well as another chapter that you write about how these types of ties are reproduced in civil society. And so I really applaud you for developing this concept well and applying it in a specific, detailed way with lots of diverse data. The second thing that strength in this book, I think, is the really sweeping scope of analysis. And your presentation gave us a little bit of a flavor here. Although you focus on, say, the 60s to the 80s in terms of economic development and the social consequences of how that economic development proceeded, there are many different ways in which that legacy helps us understand democratic politics or politics in the democratic era. And so, for example, your discussion in chapter 4 about the patterns of recruitment for the Ministry of Commerce and Industry based on both merit and regional ties that favored the Southeast, Seoul National University and high school ties, and how those got replicated in the private sector. And then on the sort of left of the political spectrum or the more progressive side, they created their own similar ties, but more to the Southwest. Really helps us understand then in the democratic era, the Notae, Kim Yong-sam, Kim Dae-jung era, which is known for regionalism. I think regionalism alone doesn't get us as far as your detailed discussion of these neo-familist ties. And then the third point of praise is that I think your book has this nice, very careful attention to change over time. And so this dynamic approach, consideration of the process and the legacies of recruitment patterns and how they change is a real strength of the book. So for example, in chapter 4, you talk about how Park Chung-hee initially used merit and regionalism in order to jumpstart economic growth, to get loyal and skilled bureaucrats into the bureaucracy. But over time, those ties enabled informal groupings within the bureaucracy that undermined the autonomy of the bureaucracy and allowed businesses to penetrate, creating what you call manipulative dependency. So state and business dependency, but the business was increasingly able over time to manipulate the business. Likewise, Park Chung-hee's style of intervening in goal-setting, decision-making, and implementation undermined the bureaucracy's autonomy and consistency in state decisions, but also provided a point for businesses, again, to intervene. So while the state led businesses throughout this time period, you call this a commanding dependency. They were dependent on the businesses. And this attention to change over time brings me to my first set of questions, I guess, about your book. And that is in terms of change over time. I think your argument really resonates with another recent book that came out by Yong-Chool Ha from Wesleyan University, which is called Seeds of Mobilization. And like your book, she said that practices under Park Chung-hee that worked in the short run to help jumpstart economic development had unintended consequences that may have undermined the regime's hold on power in the longer run. And I think this is a really great way of arguing and looking at change across time in the effects of policies. So in her book, for example, she talks about how the regime's policy of geospatially concentrating industrial complexes and universities helped foster education and efficient industrial production. But in the longer run, created people living close together, sharing ideas, generating a consciousness as workers, as students that fueled the pro-democracy movement. And so this leads me to ask you about change over time. What I didn't get a sense of in your book was how urbanization, so the move to cities, the move into universities, the move to these geospatially concentrated industrial plants affected neofamilist ties, the importance of them. So you know, these identities as workers or as students emerged in the 70s and 80s and then fueled the pro-democracy movement. These were new identities. The state and the police also tended to see these groups as coherent groups for surveilling and repressing in this time period. Did the process of urbanization lead to a weakening of the neo-familist ties? So now half the population lives in the greater Seoul, Gyeonggi area. Or did it really reinforce those and create new associations that made sort of invented connections among people going, maybe they have never lived in their hometown, but that regional tie is all the more important because they're trying to navigate a densely populated, highly competitive new urban setting. Then my second question relates to Korea's integration into the global economy. And in your conclusion chapter, as well as your chapter about Korea's response to the Asian financial crisis, you have some really interesting and I think mixed findings, which I wanted to push you on, I guess. So on the one hand, the IMF crisis, for example, spurred changes in financial rules and greater transparency and accountability in the state and in business in Korea. But you say that there was very little change in the chairman-driven management or the corporate governance structures of most chaebol. And in fact, many chaebol adeptly took advantage of globalization to become the major economic players that we all have Samsung phones or LG washers or whatever today. These are familiar terms. And in this process, they have expanded their proportion of the national economy in Korea and grown more important as part of Korea's economy. So I guess my question here is, did their rise to this global company status reinforce neofamilism, or has it created greater transparency and accountability? So you note, for example, the rise of litigation as a form of dispute resolution, and I'm writing a book about how laws are becoming more formalized right now. But in many of the interviews that I talk about, they say, well, the chaebol family can hire fancy lawyers from the fancy big firms, or their brother is on the Supreme Court, or something like this. All of these blood ties and family ties suggest that access to justice is not equal. And so the socio-legal scholarship talks about this as the haves come out ahead. So the chaebol and those with these neo-familist ties, even in a more legalistic, more rule-based structure, which is interacting with the global economy, they still win. And we see this after Park Geun-hye's impeachment, as well as after the Moon Jae-in administration, say with the scandal involving his justice minister. So are these neo-familist ties just providing them with better resources and ties to use these new tools like the judiciary more effectively? And then my third question relates to an issue that you bring up in the conclusion, which is both the conservatives and the progressives in Korea are trying to figure out whether there's some alternative to neofamilism. And in your conclusion, you say that Korean society is, quote, in a state of split schizophrenic flux right now. So I wanted to push you a little bit. Today, we're maybe in less of a national crisis mode than after the impeachment of Park Geun-hye or during COVID. But still, Korean politics is characterized often by this illiberal partisan competition or a mutual intolerance, and really a very split and divided society. At the same time, election results are showing the weakening of regional-based voting patterns. And we saw in the last presidential election also greater differentiation in voting patterns between older generations and younger generations, and also between young men who voted overwhelmingly for more for the conservative winner of the election, and young women who voted less for the conservatives. So in terms of how does neofamilism play out? Do young people, for example, care less about these neo-familist ties, or as a survival strategy in a highly competitive society, are the Sky, Seoul National, Korea University, and Yonsei connections, or the golden spoon that they inherited, even more important as a survival strategy? And likewise, in this tension between men and women in Korean society, I was wondering whether neofamilialism may matter more for men, maybe reinforced with military service ties, which is not one of the ties that you brought up. But it was, as women participate more in the workforce and in politics, will that dilute the importance of neofamilism? So anyway, these are just a few questions, and I really appreciated reading your book, and I highly recommend it to everyone here. After a few remarks of response from you, I will take questions from everyone as well as online.
Celeste, I don't feel any neofamilial ties with you anymore after after your questions on this. And yeah, a very relevant question, sharp questions, and interesting, important questions. But as you grow older, you don't remember everything, right? So I don't mean to, I want to be selectively memorizing anything, but I tried my best. Okay. First of all, it's a democracy issue, right? Yeah, you raised so many questions related to democracy, and I want to say the following. Before I do that, I think the when you try to understand democracy in Korea, in terms of neofamilism, I just look at the so-called progressive groups, the internal dynamics. Actually, even within the progress groups, neofamiliarism was very dampened within that group. On the surface of progressive group, but they claim that they are beyond the neo-families because they came from all of the different provinces, the nationwide sort of a distribution of the members. But that doesn't mean that there is no neo-familial. Actually, almost same degree. So the way I understand the Korean democracy is this. I mean, there's a great the gap between value for democracy and the daily practice. That aspect has not been well addressed in Korean literature on democracy. That is, in terms of value, from the elementary school on, the Korean young people are taught about the importance of democracy primarily because of U.S. influence. I'm sure one of the faculty of Brzezinski, he talked about U.S. role in the Korean democratization. I mean, same thing, similar to that. I think the fact that South Korea belonged to the Cold War system under the U.S. hegemonic power, that indicates the Korea had to adopt the most modern type of constitution without any relevance to Korean history tradition. And so if you compare Great Britain or America with South Korea in terms of women's voting rights, actually not that much far apart. 1948 in the United States, 1920, something like that. So what's the difference? You know, that much early adoption, I mean, of Korean constitution. So that's value level. But in practice, neo-familial practice, that's a huge gap. There's a huge gap between the value and the daily practice. That's the core issue for me, Korean democracy. Then, secondly, I wrote also the sense of guilt among many Korean graduates who later on hired by Korean chaebols. Why? Those majority of Korean college graduates actually they had to prepare themselves for their jobs, while some of their colleagues went out to street to demonstrate against the authoritarian government. So they graduated with a deep sense of guilt about that. So once they entered the chaebol structure, all of a sudden totally undemocratic, non-democratic practice on a daily basis. So I remember I watching 1978 June 10 big demonstration in Seoul. I went out there to watch this huge number of people gathering, and then I realized they all necktied people, the salaryman kind of thing. Then I realized I felt pity for them. Why? Because they had to come out to the mass rally in order to get rid of their guilt feeling. So what are the distinctive aspects of a Korean democratization compared to other countries? That's the issue, right? Rather than trying to apply Western model of democratization theory upon Korean society. For example, several times of peaceful transition, now Korean democracy consolidated. To me, that's nonsense. Now, do they still want to say Korean democracy consolidate now? Or what's going now? Absolutely nonsense, right? So whether Diamond or the Chicago, the guy, whoever that is, I don't think that has some relevance to Korean reality. Then that's my own observation on Korean democracy. So but here you referred to the Dr. Cho's literature, which prompted me to think about what I said in my conclusion. That is, I changed my perspective on liberalism based on my book. In other words, I don't no longer subscribe myself to the notion about either digress or progress. Why? I think, from my judgment, the success of a failure and the success of failure and success and failure actually simultaneously starts at the same time, rather than the failure or success come later. In other words, within what Park Chung-hee did, they are both success and failure. So from this historical perspective, I would say that we did not do enough for Park Chung-hee in terms of looking at the failure. We only look at the success of the economy, but then in terms of failure, no democracy. Now, I'm not talking about that democracy at all. The fundamental source of a failure of Park Chung-hee is exactly failure to upgrade or reinvent Korean tradition, so that the Korean society could have ended up with its own strongly agreed upon embeddedness. So I think, from my point of view, South Korean democracy, whatever, they are in the process of searching for their own embedded peculiarity. That's the current strategy that I'm defining. Is that enough?
Sure.
Right. And then also the rise of the chaebol, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think the you talk about legal disputes. I really agree with that. Increasing legalism in Korea, indicating possibility of getting over neofamilial practice. But in a funny way, the more chaebols win over the certain issues based upon legal procedure, the stronger neofamilial could become. That's the irony of all this. Why? The fact that chaebols win, that means more familial solidarity within itself, something. So we have to understand. I think that the rampant legalism in Korea simply means lack of a social consensus on anything, indicating society has been dead in terms of spontaneous the sort of energy to deal with. For example, Kim-Young-Nam-pop, this anti-corruption law, to me is total nonsense. I predict that as soon as it came out, it's going to be dead law. So some things cannot be managed by law. Some things should be agreed upon. So to me, the Korean legalism, yes, of course, some progress. But overall, it's kind of facade. the sort of hiding true neofamilism, something like that. That's my position. Then the third one is the alternative neofamilism, right? You mean generation issue. Once again, yes, on the surface, generation issue are very serious. But then we have to understand what I see behind this generational, the sort of a device, what I see is exactly total failure to upgrade current tradition. For example, now current tradition is such that the king, father, and teacher, they used to treat on the same level, like Yona treats me. Okay? And so, but now high school kids, middle kids school hit their own teachers in class, lie down in class, platform, without, teaching a teacher going on with her own teaching. How come French study has become like, that indicates total lack of attempt to reinvent current tradition, to upgrade current tradition, to meet with this new challenge, right? So we should not dwell too much upon generational device, because by too much focusing on generational device, we cannot understand what's really going on. If we focus, my question is this: how can you solve generational device? Then you have to kill all the people? I don't understand this. So we need to build a new kind of community based upon our own tradition. Last year, I had a public lecture in South Korea. My title was, "In South Korea, tradition becomes a tourism target." Nobody knows what Korean tradition are actually in Korea. See? They are strongly confused between traditionalism and tradition, as I said, indicate. So, as I say, we should, as Korea specialists, we should provide different perspective beyond the generational divide. Why? Why? Because if we as long as we stick to the generational divide, there's no solution, not immediate solution. Or we don't understand true picture of the current society. I stop here. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up for questions or comments. We have one online, but I'll take the first one from the audience. Greg, go ahead. Another former student of
Thank you,
Professor Haas.
Thank you, Professor Harrington. Professor Ha, it's great to be in your class again. I feel younger and better educated. As you told us, both the political economists,
At the time, I was old.
as you told us, both the political economist and the social scientist will notice and address the adverse side effects of late industrialization and social change, regional, the Southeast versus the Southwest, academics, Sky plus KMA versus the other universities, Chebol versus SME, the gender gap. Various South Korean governments have come up with affirmative action type programs to address these gaps. Have these programs worked, and do they make sense at all within the Korean context? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now you can come to graduate school with that question. But I would say this, as I said, the Korean state actually has lost its own, let's say, central role because of what I said. The Korean bureaucracy has been debureaucratized or hollowed out. So the fundamental difference between Japan and Korea is exactly that. It's Japan, too strong bureaucracy, remain unchanged. While in Korea, actually, sort of a broken bureaucracy, frankly. So state, particularly with the democratization, every 5 years, politics changes. So that further aggravates Korean bureaucracy, actually. But nevertheless, Korean Ministry of Education, actually, for example, Seoul National University one time tried to allocate different slots to those students in countryside, something, rural area, something. But it was not systematic. In other words, one example, many people don't know how much social welfare system well established in South Korea. Why? Because they only compare the macro level of the statistics relatively compared to particularly Scandinavian countries. Korean level of social welfare always came out low. That's not the case. Korean social welfare system, the problem is that nobody knows what kind of policy they have. In other words, fragmented, opportunistic application of social welfare measure, not social science, societal consensus-based kind of social welfare. That's the issue. Okay? So one example, in Japan, when the pandemic crisis broke out, the government actually allocated about $150,000 to the sort of small, medium, not self owners or something, right? In Korea, you know what it, not a debate. Ultimately, they allowed more loan from banks. Now, those the small, the self-owned enterprise people, they are having a hard time in paying back with a high interest rate. See, that's exactly the contrast between and Japan. Also, inflation rate. Japan is lowest inflation rate in the entire world. Why? Enterprise never transfer the inflation sources to the down the road. While in South or opposite case, that indicates breakdown of social cohesiveness, solidarity kind of issue here. But then I don't mean to say we can go back to old Joseon dynasty. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. My argument is that Korean elite groups, whether the politician, bureaucrats or not, they have never gone down to the lowest level of the Korean society to touch upon what kind of values there still exist. And they have never done that. See, that's the only those who know about that, they are qualified to become progressive in Korea. Now, so-called Korean progressive, they are pseudo-progressive. They are not. I don't think Korean conservatives, they are not real conservatives. What kind of conservative people there who don't even talk about their own tradition, right? That's why I don't believe, I believe neither Korean progressive nor conservatives. That's why I came to the United States. Okay, so anyhow, that's my answer to you.
Thank you. We have a question from online. The questioner asks, Professor Ha, do you agree that these high school ties work to make people get jobs in the same way that going to university together does? So is there something different about high school ties versus university?
I mean, obviously nowadays high school ties they have been diluted quite a bit. Why? Because under the Park Chung-hee, the education reforms, so no more sort of the, let's say, hierarchy in Korean high school system. So let's say in the previous years, in our lifetime, let's say Gyeonggi High School is the best high school on down some ranking. No longer that ranking works, although something similar emerges now. But so the context has changed quite a bit. Now younger people more rely, I notice, more rely on college ties. Yes, the parents changing, but whether it's about college ties or university ties, same thing.
Ties still matter.
Some matters. But then my point is this: everywhere there are some ties, even in the United States, some ties. But my point here is, there are also two things. One is, my point here is why in Korea case, in the case of Korea, those three ties together actually got reinforced in the course of industrialization. That's the first point. Second point is that if you look at the Korean literature on these ties, they deal with separate. Some people do school ties, some people do regional ties. I'm talking about all together. So that's how I differentiate myself from most studies.
Yeah. And I think it's an important contribution to show how these reinforcing ties also are reinforced between state and business, between business and small business, small and medium enterprises, as you mentioned, and then also even in replicated in the progressive side of society. So we have time for maybe one more question. I think I saw your hand here. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Dr. Ha, thank you so much for your talk. Oh,
Great, thank you. Now be very
loud.
loud.
To be called the doctor. I'm not doctor.
Professor.
Functionary.
Functionary Ha. You cast some doubts about the Western or American in particular social science, political science framework for understanding Korean democracy. But I think your comments are very relevant to help understand it with more access to understanding of society. there's a big debate now between like Shin Gi-uk at Stanford, who says Korean democracy is in crisis. It's too polarized. It's too populist, has real problems. And then other people like Aram Her, Joseph Wong, Andrew Yo, who are saying, well, Korean democracy has some issues, but it's fundamentally very strong, very successful. So with your deeper understanding of society, what's your view on this kind of debate?
Yeah, actually, I'm aware of them, but I'm not that much deeply into their literature. But and I want to say this: neither of them, to me, truly historical or comparative. That's my position. And then why? Currently, I'm looking at the case of France. In other words, I'm looking at Korean democracy in the longer term. In other words, a Korean case, the core issue or problem of Korean case or Korean people is that because of their rapid economic in the industry or development, they anticipate similar kind of time span for democratization. That's nonsense. That's impossible. Okay, so that short-term perspective is a problem. But more comparatively, historically, in terms of civilizational context, South Korea is very important and unique in Asia and or in the entire world. Why? South Korea is the only case where the economic development based upon Asian model, while completely Western institutional democracy have been introduced. And then still struggling. Japan, there are 3 models in East Asia: Singapore, Korea, Japan. China, an ongoing issue. Japan failed, as you know. They failed reconciling their own value with Western democracies, and then they ultimately going to war. Singapore, Confucian model. There's only South Korea, which actually is combating or struggling with the two totally different sort of backgrounds. Okay? That's why what is going to happen in Korea would have very much civilizational significance to me. I'm not even the patriot, too much patriot, but I think simply conceptually, comparatively. Why then? If you look at England, to me, England democracy, to me, funny democracy. What kind of democracy is that where there is king and then nobility? To me, it's not a model for South Korea anymore. Okay? So the America is too much individualism-based democracy. It's not even applicable. Then the only relevant country to me, rather among them, among Western countries, France. If you look at the history of France, it took almost 100 years before it ended up with the most stable democracy through the Third Republic, 1860, around there. Okay? And then they start from ancient region. And then they struggled for 100 years. 4 different contending groups always fought each other. I mean, vengeful against each other for over 100 years. So we need to, expand our horizon. And otherwise, we are not in a position to understand what is really going on in Korea. So in a short term, it's very precarious, I understand. But longer term, I think it's some potential. But then ultimately, what is needed is some kind of embedded sort of institution, rather than practicing foreign imported institution. So until we get down to this issue of what kind of society, Korean society would emerge out of this kind of the political environment, that will determine rather than only political level. So that's why at the outset I said Western the theories, they don't deal with too much of society in terms of democratic transition. So my way of the sort of viewing this different literature is exactly from my own sort of the criteria. So from that perspective, to me, argument is just maybe some sense, but then how real is this? How real this literature is to Korean society?
So thank you very much for the discussion today. I think it's a helpful reminder to take a look at state-society relations and also to look at Korean comparative perspective, both of which I applaud. So please join me in thanking Professor Ha, and I encourage you to take a look at his new book.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.